Hello, psychology students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Module 3. We're going to talk a little bit about nature and nurture in psychology. And as we go along, you're going to need to have your own sheet of paper to write down some things as we go along. And one of the reasons why we're talking a little bit about nature nurture is the fact that some of our behavior might be linked back to our genetics, and so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the fundamentals. This might sound a little familiar, maybe a little bit like your science class, and that's good. This might be a good review of that, so follow along, write down what you need, and here we go. So let's talk about genetics. This whole idea that we contain 46 chromosomes inside of each of our nucleuses. Half of those come from each of our parents. So for the most part, we get it 23 from our mom, 23 from our dad. And these are all paired up at the time of our conception. Along with that, our chromosomes are thread-like structures of DNA. Again, the 23 from our mother, 23 from our father. And for the most part, this will eventually kind of form together into our DNA, or the deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a complex molecule that holds our genetic information and makes up our chromosomes. They say that most of us are pretty similar when you look at our genetic backgrounds, our DNA. So when we talk about the smaller sections of DNA, the stairs, if you want to call it that, they're stored in a genetic code known as our genes. And 99.9% of our four-letter DNA sequence that we have right here, for the most part, matches every other human. So we're probably more alike than we are different. When we talk about the four-letter code, the A, T, C, or G, these are called our nucleotides. And for the most part, they, again, make us very, very common amongst one another. The largest chromosome has roughly 250 million nucleotides, and the smallest one has roughly only 5 million nucleotides. So, along with that, when we talk about our genetics, you've got to talk a little bit about a couple of different terms. Mutations. For the most part, these are little errors in gene replication. This is kind of what makes us the unique people that we are. It's our source of diversity. And supposedly, these random little errors in this replication, for the most part, kind of makes us the unique people we are. You could also talk about the concept of predispositions. This is the likelihood of passing on a certain condition, a mutation, good or bad. Sometimes that might be the passing on of a certain eye color, or maybe straight hair or curly hair. It could also mean the passing on of things that are a little bit more serious, like the passing on of the predisposition for certain types of cancer. So all of us have some of these predispositions. All right, further on, talking a little bit about nature and some of our individual differences. One of the places that we need to kind of go back to is talk a little bit about twin studies. And in the field of psychology, there have been a number of these throughout history. Twin studies, for the most part, are used to collect and compare genetic similarities and differences. And some of this gives us a window into understanding the nature side of things. Genetics for the most part, or the nurturing issues, how the environment impacts an individual. And sometimes when we're doing this, we have to kind of look at the different types of twins. Sometimes identical twins might be preferred for certain studies because you're kind of looking at an individual that is kind of has the same genetic background for the most part, because we have the single egg that has been fertilized, that's been split, creating the two genetically identical organisms. Or we could be looking at fraternal studies where we are looking at twins that are developing from two different fertilized eggs that have basically unique genetic differences. And they're probably no different than any two other siblings that just happen to be sharing the same womb at the same time. Sometimes we look at things like heritability in those twin studies, and that's the degree to which certain traits are inherited. Sometimes looking at siblings through the fraternal studies isn't too bad either. But we also can look at adoption studies, and a lot of times biological parents obviously are providing the nature side, but kind of looking at the nurturing information that an adoption study might provide. So these are used to collect nurturing information. How much influence does an environment have on the upbringing of a child? And we could be looking at how maybe adopted children take on certain values or manners or attitudes. It could be political beliefs, maybe even religious beliefs of their adopted parents. And sometimes, it's kind of weird, but sometimes certain mannerisms can also lend to like maybe certain physical traits. So if an adopted parent does their hair a certain way, maybe the adopted child will do the same. So those kind of things kind of are interesting to look at through those adoption studies. It also looks at how parenting might play the role in the system of development and the development of certain behaviors for individuals. So obviously these studies are very interesting, but at times they have been very controversial, and it all depends upon how the samples were taken to do the research. All right, cultural influences, and we're gonna kind of fast forward here very quickly. Anytime we talk about culture, we're talking about the shared attitudes and beliefs and norms and behaviors of a group of people. And one of the things that we like to look at are certain cultures that are individualistic or maybe collective. And so cultures that have a sense of individualism have a focus on the needs of the self. If you're living here in the United States, we are certainly an individualistic society where we kind of put ourselves first, opposed to maybe a collective society or collectivism, which happens to focus on the needs of others, meaning that you put the needs of the group ahead of the needs of the self. And sometimes that also kind of gets into how we parent. If we come from a culture where it's very individualistic, we might say, the child is number one or the parent is number one. In a collective society, it might be more than just one individual, but it might be the entire mechanism of the family. So, children, adults, their needs are all identically important in that situation. So that kind of wraps everything up. Thank you very much.